Dare to enter Crow's Quill's books, where tales of forgotten realms and fearless souls come alive. Today's journey, Plato Wyngard and the Valley of the Immortals, chapters 18 to 19, by Mark and James Lindsay. Will you uncover the truth hidden in the shadows? Chapter 18. Mr. Chiyu was in exactly the same position he had been in when Plato left. A village leader in his 30s entered, looking very frazzled. "Excuse me, sir. Those men you told us about, they're here," the village leader informed him. "Let them in. Wait outside the door," Mr. Chu said without opening his eyes. 3 men in dark clothing entered, spacing themselves as if to surround Mr. Chu in his bed. "You knew we were coming?" asked the closest to Mr. Chu. "I did," Mr. Chu replied. "You knew back in your store?" he added. "I had a hunch," Mr. Chu replied, eyes still closed. "Do you know who we are?" "I have an idea, but until I'm sure I'm afraid I cannot help you," Mr. Chu replied. "That is disappointing," said the shortest man, showing no frustration with where this conversation was heading, or not heading. "The Immortals can't fall into the wrong hands," added Mr. Chu. "So you're willing to risk the Viper or General Toon having control?" "I have put my trust in another party. They will not fail," Mr. Chu replied. "You'd let them get the Jade Cup? I'm afraid my faith isn't as strong as yours." "And that's why you and yours won't possess it," Mr. Chu said. "Ah, but we will. After all, we are the only ones who can truly protect its gifts," another of the figures said. His voice held anger. "Rage. It rolls off you like a fever," Mr. Chu said. His eyes now open, he gazed at the angry figure. "Your secrets are unhealthy. Spare us your platitudes." "Where have you sent them?" the figure growled. The sounds of weapons being cocked echoed around them. "I think that it's time for you gentlemen to leave. You were allowed this audience. It won't happen again. Returning would be rather unpleasant for you all," Mr. Chu said. "Don't think to threaten us, old man," the figure said, but he was suddenly restrained by one of his brothers. "This is not our way," he hissed. The angry figure remained silent, his reluctance clearly evident. One of the men spoke a sentence in Latin, then shook his head in disappointment. Mr. Chu stared coldly back. The figures then departed. A young armed village male entered and knelt beside Mr. Chu's bed. "Is everything all right, sir?" "I'm afraid that our friends are in for a tough time ahead," Mr. Chu said, brooding. Chapter 19. Plato and his merry band entered the cave, weapons and torches at the ready. The air was thick and earthy, the torch beams having trouble penetrating the spider webs hanging from the ceiling. "So where's Jiong?" "Surely we don't have to go through another series of obstacles again?" Not asked, as he lit another cigarette. Bian gave the younger man a scathing look. "That's exactly what we're expecting," Plato said as he waved at the smoke filling the chamber. Bian was consulting one of the scrolls as the others continued to scan the walls of the cave. "I'm not seeing anything," Luther muttered. "Keep looking," Plato replied as they continued slowly into the cave. "It would help if we knew what we were looking for. Why does all this stuff have to be so difficult?" Not said. Bian spun around. "This stuff you're referring to is our culture. And the reason that it's so difficult is because knowledge needs to be earned. A learned, patient man is more deserving than a lazy, greedy one," Bian said angrily. "Relax, Mama," Not soothed. Then he took a step back when he saw the fire in her eyes. "It's people like you who are the cause of the chaos in our country," Bian fumed. Now it was Not's turn to redden with rage. Don't even dare to presume that you know me. I'm sick and tired of hearing this sort of bullshit from you farmers who sit back and talk and theorize, while others spend their time doing. Hot growled. Easy, kids, Plato said, attempting to defuse the situation. We are currently standing in an underground location surrounded by God knows what. Now is not the time for hotheads. He's right. Save it for another time, Luther added. The two locals nodded, but the red glint to their features suggested that both had said things that had clearly hit the mark. By Plato's estimation, they were approximately 100 meters from the mouth of the cave, and so far, they hadn't managed to find anything. "Hey, brother," Luther called out, and everyone froze. "What's up?" Plato replied, moving towards the big man. Luther had the beam of the torch aimed towards the ground. "Start switching on, people," Plato instructed. "What is it?" Bayan asked. "The floor." Luther's found stone steps. They're covering the entire floor ahead, Plato said. "We have to be very careful from here on in," Bayan said. "Like we haven't been already," Luther replied, then nodded. "Do the scrolls say anything about what to expect?" Plato asked. "Nothing really. The only thing I can suggest is that we ensure we check every stone that we place our weight on, continue to use our torches to scan the walls and ceilings, and remain vigilant," Bayan said. Plato took everyone's silence as acceptance, so he cautiously moved on. After another 20 meters, Luther halted the group yet again. "I think I can see pillars ahead," Luther said, and they shone their torches ahead, the lighter shade of the walls seeming to glow under the lights. "They're stalagmites," Plato said. "What?" Nat asked. "Mineral formations, nothing to worry about," Plato said. As they approached, the cave appeared to open up. With the soft glow of the walls, they were able to see the interior a little clearer. The cave floor was covered in the large stone steps, as well as a dozen stalagmites scattered about. Moss was growing healthily throughout this section of the cave as well. The hairs on Plato's neck were standing up, and he was beginning to get a bad vibe about their surroundings. "Hold it. Something's not right," Plato announced, and everyone froze. Plato crouched and surveyed the new section of cave they were about to enter. "Bayan, can you tell me in what sorts of ways do your people celebrate Gyeong?" Plato asked. "I don't know what you mean," Bayan replied. "How do they commemorate him?" Plato asked again. "He was revered for his prowess in battle. Villagers enact military exercises and stage strategy games," Bayan said. "Like chess," Plato replied. "Yes, games like chess," Bayan said. Plato stood with his back to the new section of cave and faced the others. "What we have before us is a game of chess. I don't know how they've accomplished it, but what we're looking at is a half-completed game. The moss is growing on the stones like a checkerboard, as well as only half the pieces, being the stalagmites." The others were skeptical, but the more they studied the area before them, the more Plato's claim gained substance. The stalagmites were of different heights and subtle shapes. "Shit, you're right," Luther swore. Bayan and Hat were quick to see it materialize before their eyes. "This is amazing," Bayan whispered. "I believe you. But how do we play if we're even supposed to?" Nat asked. "Oh, I'm sure we're supposed to play, and I have a theory how," Plato replied. "Using the start position of the particular piece, we are probably expected to walk on the steps exactly how the pieces would move on a board." "And then what?" Nat asked. "And then we wait for the counter-move," Plato suggested. Everyone except Plato looked apprehensive. That's mighty thin, brother, Luther said. Oh, it gets worse. We're expected to play an exact strategy as well, Plato said. And how are we supposed to know what strategy? Luther asked. When I was a child, my father and I played. On a couple of occasions, he tried to teach me a particular strategy known as the Ares initiative, Plato said softly. So you know this well? Nott asked. I was only a child at the time, and in essence what my father was attempting to teach me is arguably the hardest game in chess. These pieces arranged on the board are this game. Also, if we choose to play and I'm wrong, I don't know what the consequence will be, Plato said. Well, what if we choose to bypass the board? I can see that there are small areas along the walls, Nott said. Plato sighed. I thought about that as well. We'd have to hug the walls to be able to stay off the board, Plato said. Exactly, and we wouldn't even have to take part in the game, Nott said proudly. Except that the walls are covered in a hematite powder, Plato said. So? I've read about its use in Egyptian tombs. It's a metallic powder that, when inhaled, will cause a slow, painful death, Plato said. So we'll be careful. The slightest disturbance will cause the entire cavern to be filled. It will get into everything. Maybe if we had proper hazardous suits, but I'm not willing to risk us in any case, Plato said. Nat looked dejected. So, tell us your plan, Luther said, tiredly. So before we begin, checkers is a two-player game of white and black. White is the unexposed stalagmites. We are the stalagmites covered in moss, Plato said. So we're black? Luther grinned. Yes, we're black, Plato sighed. Hey, brother, if we're black, we can't possibly lose, Luther said, still grinning. Plato shook his head. How we play is simple. I will direct each one of you out. You will step where I tell you to, Plato said. And how do we take an opposing piece? Bion asked. With each piece, you will simply stop at the square before the piece, then tap it. If I'm right, this should be enough to remove it from the board, Plato said, concern etched on his face. Then we wait. Also, I'll be playing this match without sacrifice, because there is no room for error. If I make a mistake, one of us dies. There was silence from within the cavern. Luther was the first to speak. You got this, man. And if I'm going to die, what an unusual and cool way to go, Luther said. While I don't share his enthusiasm, I want to get this over with. I'm not too keen to have the Wraith or Viper catch us with no exit, Bion said, and Nott nodded. Then it's settled. Let's play, Plato announced. The game they were about to start was already half played. Plato was taking a huge gamble in guessing that there was only one strategy to follow, which would result in no casualties and a resounding win as the only option. He had his colleagues lined up behind the board. They were all waiting anxiously for him to call the first move. Not. 2 paces forward? Me. You want me to go first? Nott said, his eyes wide. Yes, Plato said slowly and soothingly. 2 paces forward, Plato prompted again. Nat stood rooted to the spot, then he took a breath and stepped carefully across the appropriate stones. Plato marveled at the young man's bravery. He knew that even members that he had served with over the years would give great pause and even object to being placed into this situation. But the newest addition to his team was continuing to surprise him. Nothing happened. Then a rumbling sounded in the cave, and one of the stalagmites that Plato assumed was a bishop disappeared through the floor with a mighty crash. Several seconds passed before they heard it crash somewhere far below. Then, without warning, One of the stalactites on the ceiling of the cave came crashing down onto a stone step below, spearing into the ground in an upright position. Everyone, including Plato, stared on in horror. "What the hell was that?" Not yelled hysterically. "I believe the cave has made its move," Plato said steadily. He conducted 4 more moves, without taking a piece or losing one of his own. "Luther, 3 paces forward," Plato instructed. The big man stepped gingerly forward, now standing directly opposite a white knight. "Now let's test my theory. Tap the piece to your front." Luther looked over his shoulder, gritted his teeth, then took a breath. Reaching out, he struck the piece with an open hand with medium force, then snatched his hand away. Nothing happened. He looked back at Plato and shrugged. Then, without warning, the cave shook and the piece Luther struck disappeared through the floor and crashed to the floor far below. There was a long pause, then Luther punched the air in triumph, yelling out in jubilation. Everyone, including Plato, followed suit. "Woo-hoo, you were right, man!" Luther yelled out. Plato felt relief flood through him, and for the first time thought they might actually get through this alive. The cave made another move, resulting in a stalactite hitting the board harmlessly. "You can do this," Bian called out. "Nat, 3 steps diagonally right." Nat's confidence had grown. He skipped across to the desired stone and waited for further instruction. A bishop disappeared through the floor and the cave grumbled. Then, much to Plato's horror, the floor crumbled beneath Nat's feet, and the young man disappeared from view. "No!" Plato screamed in panic. Luther and Bian were frozen in place as they waited to hear the crash below, resulting in their colleague's death. No crash could be heard. Not Nat's screaming, just silence. "Nat! Nat! Can you hear me?" Plato called. There was no answer. Seconds passed painfully, then the welcome echo of coughing. "Can you guys hear that?" Luther asked. "It sounds like coughing," Bian replied. "Nat, can you hear me?" Plato called out. There was another long pause. "Yes, I can hear you." The voice was weak, but it was not, and he was alive. Several more tense seconds passed, then Nat's head appeared from the hole, and he slowly pulled himself out. Panting heavily, he scrambled from the darkness below and collapsed onto the piece beside him. "Thank God, you're all right?" Plato said. "No thanks to you. You nearly got me killed. You dickhead," Nat panted. "Are we just pawns to you?" Nat added indignantly. There was another huge pause. Then Bian was the first to break silence, with laughter. Then Luther joined in. "I think that's exactly what he thought you were," Luther said. Nat glared back at the 2 people laughing at his misfortune. Then the penny dropped, and he realized what he'd said. He joined their laughter, the tension melting away. Only Plato remained silent, his part in Nat's near death too soon to forget. Nat noticed this, and he shrugged. "I'm sorry for my outburst. Accidents happen. Besides, you have been playing beautifully, something none of us would have been able to accomplish." Plato nodded back, this throat thick. He didn't trust himself to talk, and eventually he responded with a "thank you." After a few minutes of speculation and replanning their strategy, they continued on. 20 minutes later, there were only 3 white pieces left: a knight, the queen, and of course, the king. To the untrained player, it looked as if Plato had the advantage. But to anyone who has ever played the game, this was when games had been foolishly lost due to overconfidence. Plato wasn't going to take any chances. "What now?" Luther asked. Plato was studying the board. He felt sure he knew what to do, but his nerves were now getting the better of him. "You've got this, man." "Luther, one pace, stop!" Plato yelled, indecision plaguing his thoughts. Luther froze, his foot raised. This was so long ago. Plato muttered to himself. Sweat had broken out on his forehead. "Is everything okay?" Luther asked. Plato ignored his friend as a past game played out in his mind. As a child, Plato's father was a warm man, but at the same time didn't suffer fools gladly. He was always quick to admonish his son if he thought his behavior or actions were rash, in particular when playing chess. His favorite saying was, "Patience and perseverance have a magical effect before which difficulties disappear and obstacles vanish." Plato had always strived to live up to these words, and they had never let him down. Despite the stakes of the game, the wisdom remained. "Luther, stand down," Plato instructed. "You sure?" Luther replied. Plato smiled back. "Absolutely. Be on 2 paces to the front and then 1 to the left," Plato said, his voice steady and his eyes clear. Bion nodded and followed his instruction. The queen was now to her left. "Take the bastard down." Bion hit the queen and watched it drop from view. "Checkmate," Plato grinned. No sooner had Plato uttered those words than the cave began to shake, and a stalactite fell from the ceiling and struck the king's piece, shattering it entirely. The 4 of them looked on expectantly as the dust cleared. Plato ignored the possible danger as he raced towards the rubble that was the king. Much to everyone's relief, nothing untoward happened to Plato, and slowly, one at a time, they edged off their stone squares and joined him as he sorted through the pieces of rock. After several frantic seconds of digging, Plato yelled triumphantly and thrust the something into the air. The others stared closely as he displayed the statue of a dragon. Roughly 30 centimeters long and 10 centimeters in diameter, the statue had been carved from a black rock, smooth, almost like glass. Plato stared at it in awe, his breath held tight. He then passed it to Bion, who had tears shimmering in her eyes. "It's beautiful," Bion whispered. No one argued. "What a shame, you'll never live to see the others," a voice from the darkness crooned. They spun around, surprised at the unexpected intrusion. It took them a moment to make out the figures approaching, an athletic feminine woman leading the group. Plato's heart sank. It was the Wraith. Then everything went to hell. That seals today's tale in shadows. We hope Plato Wyngard and the Valley of the Immortals has drawn you deeper into its enigma. Return soon to Crow's Quills books, where the next chapter awaits, whispering secrets yet untold.